All right, so how do we want to begin this discussion? Maybe I could ask Tina to, tell us about, how you became interested and followed the path that you have, and to get to the point of publishing the book. And I know you're also working on creating this green, is it pediatric unit?
Well, that's dead in the water, actually,
Oh.
Arnie, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Basically, it was supposed to be a hospital because we don't have a freestanding hospital here at Mass General, where we have, I had some students do this research for me to find out how many hospitals in the country were not coalescent pediatric hospitals, and there were only 11 that still have our model where there's a unit here and a unit here and a unit here. So I felt strongly, having trained and spent the first part of my career at CHOP in Philadelphia, a name you might recognize, Roger, at UPenn, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I truly, absorbed the idea that children should be cared for in a pediatric specific space with pediatric specific systems to support that care, because they're different. And I tried to get that to happen here, and sort of double dip by making it the most eco advanced hospital in the world. Like, I wanted it to be like an International Living Futures Institute green building, which is a really high standard. You actually have to be net positive in your energy. You actually have to add energy to the grid. It's really hard to do, but I had people who thought we could do it. And I also wanted it to, even if you didn't believe in climate change, because this was before the Trump administration that I started on this path. This was 2014. I came up with this idea. I thought it would get a different kind of philanthropist, so that we would get, climate interested people to give money to this, even if they weren't that interested in healthcare. And I also wanted it to be the world's most biophilic hospital, meaning full of nature. And I had a team at the Wyss Institute at Harvard that were going to help us make these translucent membranes that could go around plants, so that you could have like a big greenhouse in the middle, and still kids with allergies or asthma wouldn't be exposed to the pollen and mold. I mean, I had this whole plan. And it got all the way up to the top of the hospital. I was very persistent. It's one of my traits. And the president of the hospital said, sure, go for it, but you have to find a donor. But then what happens in these big institutions, as many of you know, they tell you you can, have access to development, to find the development office to find a donor, but then they don't put your ideas in front of the donor. They control that very tightly for whatever their priorities are. So there's a whole chapter on it in the book of the process, and how, how frustrating it was, but also how energizing it was to many people. But we never did get we have not yet gotten the donor, but I deliberately put it in the book just in case. I mean, I know it's like a really long shot. Somebody gets exposed to that part of the book and likes the idea and comes to us. So I've kept all my privileges here. I'm not operating on humans anymore. I still operate in research, but I'm deliberately staying very connected to the hospital just in case that ever happened. And the idea was not that it in itself would make that big a climate difference of mitigation, but that it would be a prototype, because it's small. A 100-bed hospital is small enough we could do it, and do it very well. But it just goes to show you the basic problem we're all talking about. How do you make pro-environmental behavior a priority for people who have other priorities? And so the idea of the Green Children's Hospital was literally an experiment to see how far we could get by trying to do what the hypothesis was, which is, if you make it rewarding enough to the decision makers, the specific decision makers involved, and you make the idea rewarding in whatever that is to them, understanding that it's going to vary from person to person and time to time, how far can you get? So even though we don't have our Green Children's Hospital, a lot came out of the persistent pain in the neck I became, that I believe it did move the hospital's needle towards sustainability in other ways that have lasted. So, for example, one of the things that came out of that was that several of us that were clinicians kept meeting regularly, and they invited me because of the Green Children's Hospital thing. And then we eventually got funding from the hospital to create this Center for the Environment and Health at Mass General, which still exists and has been very active. We have a pillar that does research. That's my pillar. We have a pillar that does advocacy, one that does education of staff and the general public, and one that focuses on hospital operations and mitigation and adaptation, but mostly mitigation on that side. But as you all well know, this is a slow process. It's just unbearably slow getting anything to move. But you do hit these, I mean, this is to use somebody else's term, and I'm not sure I totally buy it in this context, but these sort of tipping points where people hear things enough and lots of things start to move. So for us, while I didn't get my children's hospital, we are putting up a new 1,000,000 square foot set of towers, actually, on Cambridge Street here. And it will be the greenest hospital building, I think, of its size in the country. And at first, you know, they needed to make it quote unquote green, for lack of a better term, because of changes in the Boston building codes, changes in state regulations. We live in a very blue state with a lot of conservationists, changes because advocates pushed for it. And we, as the clinicians involved in and founded the Center for the Environment and Health, we got involved and we pushed for it. And so now I'm involved with writing a case study of not so much like what did we do mechanically. Sorry, there's a little fly bug around me. So if you see me kicking at things, that's it. But what I've been most interested in with that project is what were the things that influenced the needle moving towards sustainability? And yesterday I had an hour-long, actually it was longer than an hour, interview with some of the people in the consultant firm that consult with hospitals. Hospitals pay these people to have the permitting process. I mean, there's so much to hospital. I mean, hospital building, permitting, finances that, you know, you don't know when you're a clinician on the ground, but you learn more. And it was a moving target because the environmental regulations were changing so fast. The political climate was changing fast. People had made commitments in campaigns that they had to try to live up to. And so this building got more and more sustainable under these various pressures from outside groups, from inside groups, from government groups. And when I started in my project with 2014 with the Green Children's Hospital, the idea of like a green hospital, people didn't know what it meant. They didn't even like understand what I was talking about. And yet in a few years, like there isn't much difference between 2014 when I started and 2017, 2018, when the permitting process for our new 1,000,000 square foot building was being completed. That's a cultural shift for many reasons. So I certainly don't have all the answers about behavior change, but some of the things, Roger, that you said and that you know, George and others have said, coalesce around some of these things. And so I think there are some principles. Number one, different people are going to be, I mean, this is nothing original. This is common sense that you all know. Different people are going to be motivated towards pro-environmental behavior by different things, right? People who love nature, it's going to be preserve nature. People who are into social justice, it's going to be inequity and, you know, the different ways that climate change affects the most vulnerable. People that are motivated towards, you know, science, they're going to be motivated by something else. One of the things that I found most interesting in my exploration that ended up as this book was trying to answer the question of what tends to make people environmental advocates. What is it? And it turned out that one of the most powerful, but by no means the only, was loss of a favorite place, loss of a favorite natural place, which I thought was really interesting because I don't know about you folks, but that is one of my big motivators. Like I grew up with woods and ponds and, you know, I grew up in Rhode Island, and those places, if you are a free range child in those kind of places, they're part of your bones, really, right? And and you feel threats to them like you would feel threats to an animate object, I think, sometimes. So different people, to bring that around, the point is that there is no one way, there is no one kind of person. And so the strategies to convince people are going to be different. What I looked at in the book was through the lens of this concept of reward. And it's not reward like you're a good person, it's reward in the biologic sense of how that system, which is called the reward system, works to modulate our choices. And in climate change, there are a number of them. One is, nature, loss of nature. One is, as we said, social injustice. But there are others, and several of them don't require that you care about climate change at all. So one of them, Roger, this is something you've already touched on, are the health co-benefits of pro-environmental behavior. So one way to appeal to people, and the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, which I'm a member of the steering committee on, the national organization, you may or may not know about it, but it represents, technically on paper, represents 70% of healthcare providers, of physicians, because it's a consortium of medical organizations, professional organizations. So, there's the Lung Society and the Cardiothoracic Society, and mine is the American Society of Pediatric Neurosurgeons. We're a member. And so it brings together representatives of all these medical organizations, teaches you how to be an advocate. And one of the things that they teach you how to do is climate communication through the lens of medical co-benefits. So while it's one thing to get, and some people will be motivated by this, empathy for people, in the sub-Saharan Africa region, people in the Middle East, people where the temperature gets to be 110 every day and it's becoming unlivable, and so on. And we can all empathize with that. Some people are much more influenced to behavior change for things that affect them closer to home, more directly. And so the health co-benefits idea is the way they teach you through this organization to be a climate communicator is simple messages that people can relate to. There's a whole structure of these things. You start with common ground. We all can agree that we want a healthy community. We want to be healthy. We want to breathe clean air. We want to drink pure water. We can all agree to that. And then you do your pitch about, fossil fuels have been good for progress, but there are better alternatives that are cleaner and give us cleaner air, blah, 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 blah. And then there's a whole sort of sequence of events touting the climate co-benefits of decreased fossil fuel combustion. And there are also climate co-benefits to other things like decreasing red meat consumption. So the third, so, decreased pollution, decreased meat in the diet. And the third is self propulsion. So getting people to ride their bikes and, public transportation and all of that stuff, but particularly walking and biking places instead, that this is good for your health. Exposure to nature is good for your psychological health. So that's another hook that people use to say, don't you want to, this nature, I mean, there are studies, this was quoted in the book, that show that exercise is good for your health, your physical health, but exercise in a natural environment it improves both. I mean, these are short-term studies, you can argue with them, but there is some evidence that it improves both your physical and your cognitive and psychological health. So if you go jog in the middle of a city, like, your heart rate gets better, your blood pressure gets better, all the things you'd expect. But if you jog in a park or someplace with a lot of green space, and they do cognitive tests before and after and psychological well-being tests, that same exercise in a green space improves cognitive and psychological well-being. So those are the health co-benefits of both protecting nature and self-propulsion. So there's like ways to get it in. Then there's another whole category of rewards that the descriptor and again, this is in the book, that none of this is original, the so-called honeybee rewards. And those are getting people to do pro-environmental behavior for nothing that has anything to do with climate change. So the health angle, the health co-benefits, that's usually couched as sort of a hybrid of pro-environmental behavior because of climate change and so on, but also health co-benefits. But the honeybee, the pure honeybee rewards are, we're not going to even talk about climate change. And the example of that is how Ford marketed its electric truck. So they marketed the electric truck, not saying this is the crunchy tree hugger truck because it's electric and it's better for climate change, but saying this truck kicks ass in the crush the car competitions. And like they're trying to appeal to a totally different group of people that are going to be rewarded by a totally different thing, but slip in the pro-environmental under the radar, so that the reason people make this switch to something that is electric instead of combustion has nothing to do with climate change. You hide that. And that's the honeybee reward, because the honeybee is pollinating but doesn't know it's pollinating. It's just trying to get the honey. So that's the metaphor there. And then the one that I focus on the most in the book is the one that I found really compelling in the two areas that I studied behavior change in that I thought would be most difficult. One was on a personal level and one was on a social level. So the example, as those of you who have looked at it, the book is the individual level is addiction, which is, really hard. And it can be addiction to drugs or to a behavior like gambling, shopping, those kinds of things. And as you may recall, it goes through the neurobiology theories on this. And then the collective social one was the Ebola epidemic. Like people who were trying to control the Ebola epidemic learned the hard way, because they did it wrong at first, that you had to change cultural practices. And so I was really curious, how did that happen? And the mainstay of both the individual and the cultural change were twofold. One, the information is best received by people you know or people you trust, not by like disembodied talking head experts. So people within your community or in like 12-step programs, it's because it comes from other people like yourself that you don't see as a disembodied authority figure. But the other main ingredient and main necessity is social reward. So in general, positive is better than negative. And in both of those situations, the Ebola epidemic and addiction, you're substituting a different positive reward for what you're giving up. And in both of them, one of the big rewards was social reward, which luckily is extraordinarily powerful for human beings. It's one of the main tools that I think we have in the pro-environmental movement. So the example I give is, if you're a CEO and you have a choice about doing something pro-environmental, but it's going to cut your bottom line, it's going to reduce your margin a little bit, that's really hard to do, especially if your board of trustees is going to, figure your bonus based on your margin. But if you get 5 CEOs together, 5 peer CEOs, and you all do it together, it's just easier to do, because you have that social support and that social reward of other people saying, wow, I did it too. That's great. Let's do it together. Yeah, I did it, reinforcing each other. And I think that is one of the strong tools that we have. That's why organizations like yours work, because not only do you all have common purpose, but you meet people you like. It's fun. I mean, it's great to meet you people. You're all fascinating people that have come to this conclusion that this is a really, really critical thing to tackle from such different pathways. And every one of you has a fascinating story, and you enjoy each other's company. I mean, granted, every group has its frictions and its, power struggles, but it's more positive than not. And it's certainly more positive. I mean, I can't speak for each of you, of course, but it's generally more positive doing it with other people than all by yourself, hitting your head against the wall, not knowing where to start. So that social reward is one of our tools. And that's, I think, why the Sunshine Movement started in the youth. What are they drawn to? Other kids and the affirmation of their peers. That's what they do at that stage of their lives. What do we do at this stage of our lives? We try to make sure we have meaning. What are the things that give you life satisfaction? Study after study has shown this. It's two things: relationships and a sense of purpose. It's not your money. It's not how many awards you have on your wall. I mean, yes, those things oscillate your minute to minute happiness or minute to minute satisfaction. It's not the Amazon package that comes to your door. It's social reward of relationships, and it's a sense of purpose. So those things are highly rewarding. And I think that's how that's I don't have a magic bullet. I just have things that are the way we were designed to work by evolution, and try to capitalize on those traits, recognize those differences among different people. And if you have a specific challenge, like you're trying to get legislation passed and you know who the politicians are that this may resonate with, you look at what might make their individual reward system be important. If they're a social justice person who's had that as their resume, if they're an economic person, you try to make the economic argument. For each person that you're trying to get over the hurdle with, you've got to customize it some. But what keeps you going is the social reward and the sense of purpose. So I'll stop there. That's sort of an overview of an answer to the question of how do you change behavior. I don't know. If it were easy, they would have done it by now. Or as we used to say my mentors used to say in neurosurgery, if brain surgery were easy, they'd do it at Sears, so.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, I understand a little bit about reward system, but how you're saying you come to people and they already have something going that's their individual reward. How do you see that? I mean, and there probably are many of them, I guess. I mean, I just thinking of something so simple as like, well, it's for people find it's rewarding to eat meat. I don't know, and so where does that come from, and how is that the same or different from other rewards? I mean, people get a reward from taking a drug, and then we develop this addiction, and we know that there's something neurobiological and genetically determined about that. Is to what extent, what are the factors that go into that original determination of the reward that we're trying to replace with another reward?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Every decision is made based on millions of factors, literally millions of factors. And so it's not like, oh, I'm going to do it because of this reward. But to answer the question of why is red meat rewarding? Because evolutionarily, you didn't get it very often. And the person who found it really rewarding and would work for it, or elbow his or her way in to make sure they got some, that person survived and the other person didn't. Same with honey, same with other things. The reason red meat is and continues to be so rewarding is our brains stopped evolving 200,000 years ago. And that evolution happened in the, hundreds of thousands of years before that to create these preferences that were based on immediate survival value. So the reason red meat tastes so good to humans is because our brains didn't evolve after red meat stopped being rare. And so now red meat is like bad for our environment, and it's actually not great for our health. But it was when we didn't have much nutrition and we were always looking for those micronutrients that red meat has. We have other sources now. But that's why it's so rewarding. That's why sugar, fat, salt, meat, they're great. But we have it all in excess now, and now they're bad for us. There was just a study that came out in Harvard Medicine News this week about red meat. They've done a study over decades and decades of, they follow these people, what they eat and what their health risks are. Red meat also increases your risk of type 2 diabetes significantly. So, it's not great for you, but it sure tastes good. So the answer to your question is why are things rewarding? Well, some things as I have tried to lay out, but it's hard. A lot of what is rewarding is predisposed by our genetic inheritance. But our reward system is incredibly flexible. And, the extreme example in the book is cats. It's the ancient Egyptian cats that were venerated and worshipped. And Europe in the Middle Age used to torture cats publicly and people thought it was great. It would be like the big event in the center of town was to watch these cats being dipped by their tails into fires. And the more they howled and screamed, the more everybody clapped and applauded, and the kids would cheer. Why is that? Why was that rewarding? Because the religious leaders of the time, and this went on for hundreds of years, it stopped in like the early 1800s, the religious readers of the times told people and believed that the devil lived in cats. So the more you tortured the cats, the more you were torturing the devil. So this is the concept of what in the book is called gullibility. And it's not gullibility like you're stupid. It's the inherent evolutionarily adaptive tendency to believe what we are told by authority figures. Because if you didn't have that tendency and you were about to step on a poison ant nest and your grandfather said, stop, like you'd be more likely to die. So this idea of being predisposed to believe what an authority figure tells you is part of our evolutionary inheritance. Now, some of us are more that way, some of us are less that way, like every trait. I mean, there's rebels who don't believe in any authority, and there's people who are very, very authority oriented. Some of that's nature, some of that's nurture. But the point is of that example, that horrifying example of cats, is that people's attitude towards cats as being goddesses or the devil is influenced by their environment, by what they're taught culturally. So a lot of our preferences about what's rewarding depends on, it's a dance between our inherited tendencies and the environment we live on. So as more and more people start to get scared about climate change, that's part of what's tipped the needle to people wanting to get involved. The challenge is, as Arnie said, it's such a wicked problem. It's so big, it's so vast that people just get depressed. It makes them feel bad. And so the challenge of those of us in climate education or climate communication is, how do we do climate change without having it make people feel bad? And that's a hard one. But there are ways. I mean, one is to appeal to people's love of nature, for people for whom that resonates, appeal to social justice for people for whom that resonates, make it fun by doing social events and social groups. But one thing I feel fairly strongly about that we have failed as an environmental movement to do, and there's, I think, reasons for this, is we have failed to give people a really realistic but hopeful view of what the future can look like on the other side of climate change. And I think that that's hard for two reasons. One, because the pace of change has accelerated so much that we can't process it all, and thinking that far ahead when, you know, there's AI and like you can't even keep up with the passwords on your laptop, and you know, which words are okay and which are politically incorrect. I mean, like, the pace of change has accelerated to the point where I think it's really hard for all of us. And I think that's part of what's behind the malaise around the world. Plus, I think it's part of what's behind to a rightward shift to fundamentalism, fundamental religion, fundamental politics, a 1950s pseudo view of the past that seems like more stable. And then you add climate change, your very like planet is changing. Like, it's really disruptive and disorienting. And so this problem isn't going to be better materially, like climate change isn't going to be better until well after 2100, just because of the physics. So how do we help people do things where they're never going to see the effects, and it's preventative? It's preventive. It's like getting the shingles vaccine. Like, why should I get a shot when I've never had it? Like, I'm preventing, like that. Those are challenges. So, I mean, one of the questions is, do we have to appeal to, as we say in head injury, you want like intermediate markers, like you can see that CO2 is slowing down. You can see like that's your reward, but you're not going to see the effects on climate change and the weather patterns and heat waves and all of that, because that's going to go on. How do you prepare people for that? But say what you do can blunt the curve, just like with the pandemic. People are still going to get sick. We're going to have, you know, mourning and mortality, but we can limit the amount, and we're preparing for a brighter future on the other side. I think that so much is changing that brighter future on the other side, if we focus on nature, okay, we might be able to do that, but life is changing so fast that it's hard to even picture what it's going to be like after 2100. So that was a very long, very wordy answer to the question of how do we know what's rewarding?
Right.
And I think that how do we get our preferences? How do we develop them? They are changeable. We know that they are changeable. And the fact that climate change is becoming more apparent to more people. I mean, the polls show the number of people who are worried about it is going up and up and up. And many people are hungry to do something, but they don't know where to start. So I think to make it rewarding for them, you have to have intermediate endpoints that may not feel like, oh, look, the weather's better, it's cooling off. We're not going to have that in people's short-term lifetimes, decades, or even 100 years. But they'll have to follow the metrics, and that requires nothing they can see, feel, or hear directly. They'll have to believe in experts, and those experts have to be credible. And, that's why some of the climate communicators look at who's credible to carry the message. And that's why healthcare has gotten so involved in this, because healthcare providers still tend to be relatively considered credible, at least on science matters, to the general public.
Mm-hmm. Got to, yeah. So I don't want to dominate here, but I'll ask one more follow-up anyway. You are, I think, talking about two different audiences. I mean, there are folks who are not yet engaged with and caring about dealing with climate change, and we're trying to communicate with them and bring them on board to take some steps. Another group of people would be folks who are members of our organization who are in the climate movement, and they want to do what they can do. They want to accomplish things, but when it comes down to certain individual behaviors, this is it's a little bit like, well, we know that the people need to be using public transportation more and using their cars less and using their bikes, knowing this. But when it comes down to an individual, even though they kind of know that, they have to change some behaviors that are rewarding to them. It's easier to get into the car and enjoy the ride, and it's harder to walk to the bus and take the time, and you feel like you're losing time. And George and I have brainstormed a little bit about, just based on our own experience, what's going on there. I mean, one thing is you're giving up something that's meaningful to you potentially. Like, well, I need my time to do other work, so therefore I'm going to take the car in order to do that. I'm making a trade-off of that, and I like to have my time to watch TV at night, and otherwise I wouldn't have that time. The other is that people think that this notion of, well, it's really not going to make that much of a difference. It's more important that I drive my car and go and advocate to my legislator than it is that I actually make this change. And it's just me. We know it's only a relatively small proportion of what needs to happen. So we're not going to do it. How do you think about that thing?
Great question. So I don't think it's smart to start with a behavior that's really hard for people to change. There are many other behaviors they could do. So with respect to people who are older, taking public transportation by choice, that's too high a bar for many people. I totally agree with you. But how many people fly more than once a year? So one goal for constituents in our age group could be one less airplane trip a year. Just start with that. So here are the facts. We are at about, I'm rounding here, 20 tons per carbon per person, per capita in the US annually. To stay at 1.5, which is probably too late now, we have to get down to 2.1 tons of carbon per person per year. That's a big drop. The world average is about 5 tons. So we are 4 times the world average.
Yeah.
One plane trip to the West Coast and back, or to Europe and back, one plane trip, 2 tons per person. So on the list of things that people suggest as goals, doesn't say don't take a plane. It says take one less plane trip a year. That's doable for many people. That's doable. And then they say, oh yeah, but it's a wedding. And okay, but how about the vacation that you could drive to Maine? Right? So that could be a movement. One less plane trip a year.
Right. Yeah.
Plant-based diets. You don't have to never have red meat, but make your red meat strips on top of broccolini or something. Don't have a 8-pound slab. One meatless day, start with incremental steps. One
Right.
meatless day a week. If you eat meat, cut your meat production, cut your red meat. It's good for your health. It's good. And it's not that hard. It's just not that hard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
moving towards a plant-based diet, one less plane trip a year. Those are pretty easy for the 1%.
Yeah,
I
I think so.
What do
Yeah.
you think? You buy that?
Well, I mean, I think that I do, and I think that's definitely the right approach. On the other hand, the pushback, I mean, even I experience it, is the notion like, well, that plane's still going to fly if I don't go on it. Like what the hell? Why don't I go on it? Somebody else. You
Right.
need to have a belief that there's going to be more and more and more people, and it has to start with you, and then that plane doesn't fly eventually. But that can be hard to kind of motivate somebody to.
Well, you're absolutely right, but then it's a question of scaling your movement. So if you had all the people over 65, I'm making this up, or all the people over 55, I don't care, take an age. I think it's a continuum, so I don't like picking an age, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That are in the top 10 percentile and decided to take one less plane trip a year. Then it starts to add up. So I agree with you, but then they say and they make it public to American Airlines or whatever, if you start having greener planes, greener air fleet, because the companies are investing in this stuff behind the scenes because they know that it's going to catch up to them. So, we will be your first customers on your, I mean, I'm making this up a little bit, but you can have campaigns that catch on. And the other point I want to make is that we're focusing throughout this discussion today on individual behavior. But the biggest thing, a lot of times, the biggest thing you do is collective action. So how about a get out the vote campaign in swing states? There's something called, you probably know this already, your organization's probably involved in it, but there are several, but one that I'm involved with because it came through the Med Society Consortium is something called the Environmental Voters Project.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, they get out people who have not voted in the last 2 elections, who by their marketing techniques have an 80% chance of having environment as their top priority in the rank order of priorities. And then they do everything they can, even if it has nothing to do with the environment, it's honeybee approach. What does it take to get that person to go vote? Not even talking to them about climate necessarily. Maybe it's like providing them a bus pass. I don't know what it is, but they find out what it would be using sophisticated marketing techniques. So how about an organization gets out the vote? How about an organization supports a platform? I mean, these are other things that people can do, but they're collective. So what's the reward of collective action? Number one, you don't say, well, why is my one little thing going to make a difference? It doesn't make a difference individually that you can perceive, but even at scale, it doesn't make a difference you can perceive unless you're doing measurements and ancillary kinds of metrics, that you have to be sort of scientifically or statistically savvy to believe it or to have it have a meaning to you. So that's where you get into, more collective action.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you can do both. It's not either or. It's like, what the Med Society Consortium does, and again, I'm sorry to keep talking about that, but it's in my head right now, is, they have you take a pledge when you go to their meetings. You fill out a postcard and mail it to yourself, and it says, I'm gonna encourage 3 people to vote, or whatever it is, So you want people to feel, but this is the challenge, like you said, you want people to feel positive, not negative.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reward is all going to be pretty much social. It's all going to be social. And, for people in our age strata, it might be, do you want your kids to blame you? Do you want your grandchildren to blame you? I mean, there might be a little bit of guilt there. And then they can say, I did something good for the environment. Here's what it was. Or we as a family are going to take one less, plane ride trip to a vacation spot. I'm making this stuff up, but these are the kinds of things.
There's a huge amount of things that you said, and I'm glad I'm recording this.
Kind of dense,
but,
I know. The book is dense.
Okay.
A couple of things. The struck me. What I hear you saying and what I read in the book and or heard from when I listened to the book is that, by and large, we are who we are and how we evolve to be, and that is to behavior change has to do with things that have a more immediate reward, and the impacts of climate change, just don't fit that mold. And so, you were listing things that do have a reward, and perhaps the co-benefit is to mitigate climate change. And I think that's a fair summary of a lot of where you're coming from. One question that occurs to me was you were pointing out that different people are rewarded in different ways depending on whether their focus is social justice or preserving the forests, or come from a scientific background and just enjoy looking at the latest technological innovations. And one of the results of that we see within Elders Climate Action, working both within our own group and with other groups, is that some groups have a particular focus, and oftentimes it is social justice. Other times it's preserving our forests. And oftentimes, in fact, I think most times, the result of that is that their proposed solution to mitigating climate change is associated with the particular reward system that they have. So if they're focused on social justice, then any action that you take to mitigate climate change has to have a major social justice component. And that, may or may not, from a quote scientific point of view, be, the most effective way to mitigate climate change. And similarly for folks who are focused primarily on preserving forests, they may focus on that almost exclusively, and reducing fossil fuel use or other aspects of mitigating climate change may be more secondary. So in fact, that gets us in Elders Climate Action, and even within this group, and sometimes in hot water, we try to be, I guess we call ourselves non-ideological, or whatever that means. And just yesterday we had what we call our leadership team meeting, and we're sort of on the outside looking in with some other climate groups, because, or at least a lot of the ones in the greater Boston area, are really focused on social justice, and we try to be, as I said, less ideological, which might mean whatever it means, but it ends up that those folks may look at climate change through this social justice lens and come up with what they call any solution has to be one that that has a major component, a social justice component, and anything else is called, and I'm sure you've heard the term, a false solution, in quotes. And so I don't know what you think of all that. I'm just sort of riffing off the top of my head, but it was two things. One is this idea, and I agree with that we as a group, Elders Climate Action, we say we're here because we care about the future and our grandchildren, and we're elders. And I think you're saying, well, that's really not true. I mean, what we really care about is our immediate rewards, and Okay, let me, I can see you shaking your head, so let me stop there.
Yeah, sorry. Well, the system that I describe in the book that is called the reward system is based on response for utility calculations that generally have to do with, are heavily biased evolutionarily for survival value, which is usually in the short term. Okay, so that's where that comes from. But humans obviously have the capacity to think long term. It's not easy for us. It doesn't come as easily to us, but we can. I mean, if we couldn't, George Washington wouldn't have thanked the Emperor of China for bringing the cherry trees and saying these, you know, my descendants will enjoy these. I mean, we obviously can use our cognition to think beyond our lifetime, but it's a challenge in terms of our emotions, except maybe about our children, or, you know, sort of existential sense that the world is going to end, or some horrible thing like, what's it all been about? We're going to destroy ourselves. I mean, we can, you know, kids are good at climate anxiety, but so are we at our strata. But I think I want to comment on this social justice thing. I totally have had the same experience of what you're describing, Arnie, where there are people who believe that the two are equivalent, that working on climate change by definition is working on social justice. There is another school of thought in the climate world that I live in that says that's one point of view, but it's not universally adhered to by everyone in the climate world. So there are people that have very explicitly made statements like climate justice is social justice, like that the two are equivalent. I personally think that's narrow, but it does appeal to a certain group of people for whom that's really important and that resonates. I would question a group like this. What can you do with your advantage? What can you do with the advantage of what your group is? You're people with a lifetime of experience coming from lots of different groups and paths and professions. My guess is the people, I could be wrong, you tell me, but my guess is most of your members in Elders Climate Action, at least in Massachusetts, maybe is this a national organization? Or state chapters?
Both.
I mean,
Yeah.
both. Okay, so my guess would be, at least in Massachusetts, the vast majority of your members are highly educated people of some, at least middle class and upper means. Is that probably correct? I mean, that's sort of the demographic of who cares about climate change the most. And so I would wonder, how do you play to your strengths? How do you, if you want to convince people, how do you play to those? Those are powerful strengths. Experience, professional, educational backgrounds, passion, commitment. Yeah, young people have passion and commitment, but they don't have what you have. They have other things, maybe. They have, you know, stamina that we don't have. But what do you have? You have problem solving experience in all different spheres. So how do you harness that? If what you want to do is convince people, how do you harness that to convince people? So one of the things I found so interesting when I was researching the book was research about pro-environmental behavior shifts in the sphere of home renovations. So that ended up, I was surprised at this, but it ended up being like a major part of one chapter. Because there's actually a fair amount of research. How do people decide what kind of roof to put on their house? How do they decide, you know, triple pane windows? And it turns out that there are studies on this. Why? Because when people are trying to sell you stuff, there's a lot of research on it, because they'll benefit from the results. So there's a lot of marketing research. I had no idea there are like 15 different professional journals of marketing. It's like, really? Like, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies from med school when they told us, don't take the Eli Lilly stethoscope, you know, that's like giving into the marketing people. So, you know, I grew up with the idea that like commercial stuff was like evil, you know, or brand names and so on. That's the era I grew up in. But it turns out that if your neighbor tells you they use those windows and liked them, you are I don't know, some X number of times more likely to get that brand than if you hear it from a salesperson or something like that. If someone you know advocates for something. And so I wonder about, you know, a campaign worried about climate change, but don't know where to start. Let's start with X. So I don't think it has to be about social justice. I would say, where's your power? Is your power in your own personal networks, your own families, the companies you retired from, the students you taught? Where's your biggest connectivity as a group and as individuals within that group? What message can you give that plays to your advantages as, you know, authority figures, in the sense that you have life of experience and you clearly have, you know, passion for this topic? And then I would see what you could do to focus on those strengths and use them.
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, two things occurred to me, and then I'll let other people weigh in. When you ask that question, you know, one is, I mean, at the community level, you know, oftentimes people who are, you know, in their stage of life where they're still raising their children and they've got so many other things on their plate, even if they, you know, are really, you know, would be climate activists, that they just don't have the hours in the day to put to, you know, that you know, that feeling to use. And so as a retired individual, you know, I do and can have, you know, more of an impact at the community level than I would have, you know, 20 years ago, when my whole life was, you know, involved in my work and raising my kids and so on. In Elders Climate Action, I think that we are viewed, and one of the things we do quite a bit, practically our main focus, is advocacy for state level legislation. You know, I think we are viewed by members of the legislature and the administration as, you know, people who, you know, speak with, you know, as you said, some experience and background and you know, are respected for that. And at least that's what the legislators tell us. Maybe they tell us that everybody, but that's what we hear back. And I think they view that perspective as very helpful, as not necessarily coming from, you know, someone, as you were saying, you know, the younger generation has a lot to say, but they also have a lot to learn. So, you know, and you know, and other groups that have a specific, you know, picking on social justice focus, you know, I think they understand that that's where they're coming from, and it's very important, but maybe it's not the whole picture. So I just, you know, just in response to playing to your strengths, you know, those are the two that occur to me. I don't know how other people feel about it.
Well, just I'm just also in terms of coming back to reward systems, I think that because of the kind of people we are and the lives that we have led, I think our reward system responds to solving problems using our brains to think through something and say, oh, that's what we dig deep into policy, and to think that we can take a complex issue and we can break it down and we can find a new way forward, a different way forward. And then we feel good about that. And it's science-based and it's rational. And it takes into account different points of view. And to Arnie's point, the folks that some of the kinds of things the folks he's talking about is their reward system has to do with if they're, you know, kind of white middle class people working with people of color and disadvantaged people, that they are getting positive feedback from the disadvantaged people who for a variety of reasons are just speaking only to their real but narrow self-interest, and think that well, that's what social justice is. And so if here's the example, if a group of folks in the environmental justice table are saying that, we really want to set up a system so that we can never have hardly ever have any new wires or transmission or anything in our community, because we've just had a hard time with everything our whole lives. So we shouldn't have to take any of the burden of having a substation anywhere near us ever again. And we sort of said, well, geez, that's a little, yeah, a little extreme, because the reality is if we don't have these substations, we're not going to stop climate change. And it's like, so our reward system is solving the problem and thinking about the big picture, and their reward system is about satisfying what they think is kind of an important group of people that that they really respect, and that's where they're getting kind of their social reward from. And then we have a little bit of a difference there. That may be a little too basic a thing on the reward system, but I think it's a little bit of what's going on.
But that's where you get somebody like Roy involved, who knows about the electrical grid and, has experience in it. So I don't know, part of me thinks about, wouldn't it be cool to team up with the Sunrise Movement and say, we have life experience. We can help advise you on how to get your goals met. Like, that would be cool. There is too much age segregation. That is a relatively new thing in society. Like, through most of human life, we were not segregated by age. That's a modern, truly modern invention. And so the fact that kids are always with other kids and not in mixed groups of age, that's new. And it's not evolutionarily like what is best, I think.
Yeah.
And the other thought is, can you be the effector arm, to use a medical analogy? Like you said, Arnie, the people who are in the midlife of their working careers, they may have the desire, but they don't have the time. So if you've got the time and some of the know-how, can you be the effector arm? For those of you not in medicine, the effector are the antibodies that go do the work, like they're the ones that actually do the job. So there can be alliances that play to your strengths, where the young people have the passion, but they don't have the know-how or the knowledge. So I can see all kinds of things, but then you can't do everything. You got to sort of pick. We haven't heard from George or Paul or Roy or Betty, so I want to make sure they have some time.
Well, I'll jump in then. So I have two main thoughts. One is based on the novelty versus familiarity balance that occurs with reward. And it's basically, from your book, it's something that changes over time. Early on, you want people to go explore. And by the time our age, we're kind of more, we tend to be more rewarded by things that are familiar. So, two things. Does the dopamine effect basically limit that? And can we do things that help us do more novel? Because when people get in ruts, that's one of the problems, is that they're so used to taking their car. They're so used to eating a particular meal. How do you get folks to break out of that and try novel things? The second thing, since I'll just ask one set of questions, it's somewhat related. We now have Coach Wells and Kamala, and we have this new elevated level of excitement and probably impacting the reward system. Is that something that we somehow can kind of piggyback on to move things forward faster, get people, are they more susceptible to doing things that are new and happy and novel? So that's kind of one big ball of things. So I'll stop.
I'm so glad you brought that up, George, because I just found that whole concept fascinating. I realized that when I'm liberally educated and I have very liberal views, but I realized when I did the research for that part of the book that I'm actually a conservative personality. I'm not a risk taker. I mean, I'm a neurosurgeon. I had to be a risk taker to some extent, but I like things that are familiar. I don't like change. I don't like loss of a beautiful place that I love in nature. I'm a little bit risk averse. And so I realize that you can be liberally educated and still have that sort of draw to familiarity as part of your temperament. So what I would say is that while there is some evidence that kids are highly rewarded by novelty, that never goes away. It's not like when you get old, you only like the familiar, but there are two things that tend to tip the needle a little bit more towards familiar becoming more rewarding. One is getting older, but the other is stress. And I happen to think that a lot of this backlash to conservatism, both politically in our own country, but around the world to religious fundamentalism, is in reaction to this accelerating pace of change that is stressing people out. They cannot, the brain is now at the point where it's hitting its limit in adapting to change, because the pace of change in every epoch of time is getting faster and faster because of science and technology. Culture follows science and technology and it tries to keep up, but it's a little behind. And because science and technology is exponential, it's just getting faster and faster. And so I think that the backlash and this desire for something that feels familiar is affecting us worldwide, irrespective of our age. And I think that this is part of what is underpinning the general malaise that we're feeling around the world. So to bring that around to the question of climate change, and to answer your question about, the political thing, I found it fascinating to watch this morning when I was reading the New York Times on my phone, and see these snippets of the convention. Part of that whole crowd thing, that's social reward. There's people who that's all they study is crowd behavior, and there's another term for it that I can't bring up right now, but collective behavior in crowds. And so that increases the reward to have all these people around you also cheering, also waving the signs. I mean, that's how conventions get everybody razzed up. It's the same at a Taylor Swift concert, or if you go to the Rolling Stones concert. Can you believe those guys are still doing that? It's just amazing, isn't it? But anyway, the point is that we never lose our ability to be rewarded by the novel, but stress and age tip your scale a little bit. But it's not like it passes some point and you only are rewarded by familiarity and you don't like novelty. You always like both. It's just on average, these things shift the balance a little bit. So, I mean, if you're trying to appeal to older people or younger people who are stressed out by the pace of change, this is where I think that we have failed in our vision for the future, because there's nothing familiar in it. It's just negative gloom and just, disruption and climate disruption and weather disasters and famine. It's like, who wants to even go there? One of the scoping reviews that we did for the Journal of Climate Change and Health it was done by each specialty, how climate change is affecting each specialty. And the one on OBGYN and reproductive health, they could pick whatever question they were going to try to scope through a systematic literature review. And one of the ones they picked was how climate change is affecting people's desire to have children, and what's been written about that. And I just read something else about this somewhere about, people are afraid of the future. Since when did that happen? I personally think that decreased population is an essential part. But you talk about things that our age group is uniquely positioned for. Why is there so much hand wringing by epidemiologists and futurists and demographers about getting over the population hump around, it's going to peak, they say, at 2060, and it's going to continue to go up till about 2100, and then it's going to come down. Global population is the prediction, as fast as it's gone up. Why does that have everybody wringing their hands? Because they say no one's going to support the older people. It's terrible. It's going to make our planet more balanced if we can get over that hump. So the economists that I've talked to about that demographic shift say it's going to be a couple of generations that are going to be tough, because there's going to be more old people than young people, but we're going to get through it. Like, has anybody in Elders Climate Action or Third Act, or has anybody talked about that? There's a climate change thing we could address, is the demographic population shift. Who's going to take care of the older people? How are we going to do it? How are we going to stay healthy so we can take care of ourselves? How are we going to have advanced directives so we don't linger in ICUs for 6 months before we die? How are we going to help the younger people take care of us when we're older by taking care of ourselves? That's a climate change issue. I mean, you could frame that as a climate change issue that has not been tackled.
That's sort of it's a kind of a third rail.
It is, but it's part of the process. It's part of the problem that we have to solve. Tell me more why you say it's a third rail, Arnie.
Well, when we had this is several months ago, we have a chapter-wide Google group that had about 500 people in it, which really is intended just to make announcements. But one member decided to use it as a discussion forum about population growth and how we need to, to get that's really probably, I think in this individual's perception, the primary driver behind the climate change crisis, the growth in population. And it got, within a couple of days, I think we had 40 to 50 people unsubscribe from our Google group, because that discussion got started. I think the way you framed it, how you're going to care for this, bulging demographic of elder people may be a way to address it. But, just, speaking about, people having, younger, fewer kids and population growth. Whenever I've been in a room where that topic has been brought up, it just raises apparently so many very strong feelings that it's just a tough one to address head on. Maybe the way that you framed it is a way to speak to it.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a very controversial topic, and it's a good microcosm of why climate change discussions are hard, because none of us knows enough. There's nobody I know who knows everything about climate change and is an authority on all aspects. It's too big. It's too big. I've come to think of climate change, and I might have said this to you, Betty, so I apologize, but as the biggest elephant you can imagine, so big you can't even see to the next limb of the elephant, and we're all touching the elephant with our pinky with our eyes closed. That's how big it is. We can't see between the spaces. So this issue of the demographic shift, I'll tell you, I just got funded for something called a scholarly work group at Harvard Med School, Global Health, on the intersection of climate change, war, and health, which I think is a really interesting and sad intersection. Like, why are we, seeing this asteroid of climate change come at us, and we're wasting human capital and incredible expense on waging wars that are just making people suffer? Like, what a waste, what a stupid waste on all sides. So, like, how can we get the real cost over generations of those kind of intersections on the plates of policymakers so that they think twice about engaging, think more long-term, like 100 years, 50, 100 years instead of like 5 years. That's another like intractable, difficult problem. But this issue of the demographic shift, I think, is a really, really controversial, like you said, landmine, third rail topic that isn't addressed enough. So who better to address it? Like maybe we need a scholarly working group for that. Maybe we need to bring in demographers, because any two people you talk to are going to tell you something absolutely different. There's the guy who wrote the book called Fatal Misconception, who makes the case that climate change has nothing to do with population. It doesn't, in the sense that the agricultural revolution was able to feed these huge amounts of people. It does, in my opinion, when you talk about waste, rising income levels that correlate with carbon output, and land use. Land use is a big one, because we need to preserve our land in order to suck up our carbon. And also, I personally believe, because I personally have come to believe that for many, not all, but for many people, like exposure to things that are growing is part of our psychological health. So I don't know the answer to that. To me, it's a fascinating and interesting question that hasn't, I have not seen much written about it or done about it or talked about it.
I totally agree with you that the accelerating changes of modernity are compounding all our problems, and that the malaise you mentioned and the angst that it causes, and I would also add in isolation, or would drive this movement towards various fundamentalisms, but particularly the religious, and that. And in fact, I see that as fueling the MAGA, which normally makes no sense, but it does fulfill that need for fundamentalism, and it also gives a need for community, and they seem to have fun, right? It has those appeals, and to me, you're not going to just make that go away. What you need to do is replace it with something that meets those same needs.
Exactly.
And does it in a healthy way instead of a dysfunctional way. And I mean, the best I can come up with is maybe something that's nature centric. That, I mean, nature is fundamental. It does provide a sense of connection. I mean, and it can provide a sense of community. And has that, you mentioned the familiar and the changing. It can provide both of those, and that we somehow need to provide something that gives the needs of community, gives it that need of people looking for certainties, really, right? That's the idea of fundamentalism. You want easier answers in a world that's too complex to handle, right? Yeah. And the problem is those answers are almost always going to be wrong. So you want to try to guide people in directions that are better. And anyway, so I'm proposing perhaps nature, but something like that we can hook into to kind of provide a similar kind of mental ecosystem, right? That would meet the needs in a healthier way. And I think our movement needs to have that at some level to center us. I think I agree with you. We need to have more fun. It needs to be part of it. I'm shocked how much music is not a part of the present movements as much as they were in the 60s, because that provides fun. And I think that to me, the heart of music is this whole idea of the mix of familiar and novel. I mean, I think that's how it hijacks our brain, right? It provides, to me, that's the essence of music and why it appeals, because it does both of those, or it can do both of those at its best. And I think somehow we need to incorporate more of that. I think that's basically what I'm getting at. Oh, I guess there's one other thing I think you haven't mentioned that I find it motivates me, if I'm honest, and it's the sense of the heroic, right? That I can feel good about myself and that I'm fighting the good fight, right? And maybe some people that's maybe their social justice aspect of it. I don't know. But being on the right side of history, I mean, those aspects, that there's a self-reward there, and that I can frame myself that way. And it's an extent that we can frame our movement that way, and that in a sense that can be part of the community. Yeah, so those are some thoughts I had.
I love those ideas, Paul. I mean, as you're talking, I'm spinning in my head about who in Elders Climate Action is a music producer, who could team up with the Sunrise Movement and commission or find some climate anthems that appeal to young people and cross the gap. I mean, you could have a folk music climate anthem, you could have a rap climate anthem, but people in this strata of life know how to do these things. They have connections. They know how to get them done. Media and the arts are crucial to movements. So I couldn't agree with you more. And they're really rewarding and they give you immediate agency. You know, you come out with a product, it's catchy. So if that's something like it doesn't have to be shutting down a power plant. I mean, there were a group of wealthy people that I heard about through HUSE, the Harvard University Center of the Environment. They got together, they pooled their money, they bought coal mines. And then they put them out of commission. They just shut them down. It turns out coal is like by far and away the worst in terms of, you know, so the people that I know in the climate world, methane is a big one. So people are working on methane now that, you know, they've got the satellite technology, they can see it from space. They can go, this is an alignment of motivations, an alignment of rewards. They can go to the oil companies where the methane is leaking. It's not in the oil company's best interest to have their product go into the sky. They can see this from satellites and they can go to the oil companies, and they've had to figure out political mechanisms and business mechanisms to do this because they're kind of on two ends of the motivation spectrum here, like making money off fossil fuels and stopping fossil fuels. But here's where the circles align: shutting down methane leaks. That's your product going into the atmosphere. So they develop the technology, they develop the mechanisms because they have the know-how. But what you're describing is getting people revved up. I don't know why this idea keeps coming back to me about Elder Climate Action linking somehow with the Sunrise Movement, but to me, that sounds like a lot of fun. And has anybody seen the movie The Intern? It was with Robert De Niro. So it's a silly fluff movie, but it's about an older guy.
Oh, yeah.
Who goes back and becomes an intern in a business.
Right.
And like at first he's like weird. And then of course at the end he's the hero, right? Like I'm going to say we, because I'm in your age bracket, but we have stuff to offer. We have stuff to offer. You have know-how to offer. I just love this idea about music. Like act on it. Find people that are willing. Find people who want to do it. I mean, you got to just do it.
Well, we talk about it, and some of us do it. You know, but I think there's some skepticism on both sides. A little, you know, certainly the younger folks think the older generation has, you know, let them down and doesn't know what they're just sort of settling into their old age, and the elders.
Right, but you wouldn't be leading the show, Arnie. I'm sorry to cut you off. You wouldn't be leading the show. You would be saying, we have the know-how. Can you help us? Can we help you? It's building a bridge.
Yeah.
I think that they think Bernie Sanders is cool. You're Bernie Sanders.
You are. At the national level, I mean, there is a project that had some success teaming up with Sunrise Movement. I haven't heard the details, but that's out there. And I know there are a couple of folks in our organization who really continue to make an effort to get out and support the young folks and develop a relationship. I agree with Arnie. It's not as simple as stepping. There is a skepticism, and there isn't this wide openness to necessarily embracing what we have to offer. We need to find a way to build trust, build relationship, and to kind of enter into their world and take the time to do that. And I think it is worth making the effort. But I have to say the reward of doing that is not one that comes quite so easily to some of us. It's like, oh, it takes time to build a relationship. You know, let's cut to the chase. Let's take care of businesses.
It may not be the Sunrise Movement. It might be another group. It might be Emerson College of Music. It might be somebody else. Like,
Oh yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not. And I feel bad. Betty, you've been trying to get a word in edgewise for a while. What were you going to say? I'm sorry. You're on mute.
Sorry, and I apologize. A repairman will be walking back and forth behind me because my dishwasher broke. So this is
Ask
when
him if he knows any music producers. No, just kidding.
I feel like having seen him, probably not.
You never know.
You know, we had a connection at Berkeley School of Music.
Yeah, we do actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking back to a lot of sort of smaller things that you said. And I'm not thinking right this minute on the large scale. But I think that one thing that we have done well, at least for some of our members, involves that discussion about novelty and getting people to get beyond the familiar and do novel things. And I think we do that reasonably successfully with at least a portion of our membership. But maybe we need to figure out how to do it with more. And I think it was easier when we were able to meet in person, but you know, we live all over the place. And so it's not so easy anymore. But I know, for example, the first time I went to lobby at the State House, well, I was really out of my comfort zone. You know, that was a whole new thing. And I think that there are others who have had that experience and that it becomes more comfortable. And then when you do that in terms of ways of delivering message and what sorts of things work, you know, if you testify at some of these hearings, which I've done a few times now, you know, and one message is we want science, we want to know the hard facts. And so, you know, we do that. But then there's this other side of things where you want to have stories, human connection. And it is very interesting, even though our legislators are pretty smart and, you know, understand these subject areas pretty well, what gets them every time is the human interest stories. And you watched the convention last night, there was a lot of that there too. So I think maybe we have to think harder about how to present that human interest side, but also provide the science side. Because as you say, everybody has different things that motivate them, and it's very tricky to figure out how best to frame our messages so that they contain enough things that will get enough people. And in this case, I'm talking particularly about members of a legislative committee. So I think we have to work harder at it. It's good to have it emphasized, but we have to think about how to do it better. And you know, that's part of what we're struggling with here, is how to do it better. One of the other areas that I think is very interesting is business about talking to kids. And I agree with everything that was said about it being not so easy to hook up with the Sunrise Movement. I mean, you know, we're old farts. They don't necessarily think that we know anything. And they're not necessarily welcoming us with open arms, even if we try to say, you know, you have a great movement, how can we help you?
You know, in the past, we've had young members in our group,
Mm.
and it might be, rather than feeling like we're intruding into their space, to invite them into ours, and then you have that, once you have that connection,
Yep,
then you
yep.
can start building
Mm.
the bridge, right?
But I have a sense, and I know who you're, you know, that, you know, those folks, the young people who have worked with us, and the aides to the legislators that we work with are generally, you know, in graduate school or something, and just amazing young people. But you know, I don't know if they're representative of the Sunrise. I think they're different.
Well,
Anyway,
it's just of the
but-
generation, right?
Yeah,
That's all.
they are younger, but I think amongst the people that I'm thinking of, and you may be thinking of, Paul, they're probably not members of Sunrise.
Right.
So
But maybe we need to be in, you know, going out there and inviting them and make a point of doing
Yeah.
so. And there are other groups that we have tried.
but
And
anyway, I do
also-
see we're past the time that we told
Yeah.
Tina that we would, and this has been just an amazing, I mean, for me, I mean, just speaking for myself, this has been just an amazing discussion. We've covered so many areas. I'd love to, you know, bring you back and be able to continue this discussion.
Well,
You know,
before
the
we
ex-
go, can I just respond to something
Yeah.
Betty said? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
You know, Betty, as you were talking, I was starting to think about if you wanted to make, okay, so we covered a lot of ground, like you said, Arnie. We talked about, you know, making a protest song. We talked about nature. We talked about a lot of different things. But if you wanted to have a cohesive health message as people in the later decades, heat affects older people more. and pollution affects older people more. So if you wanted to make an advocacy position for yourself, for your own group that had a health message, you've got very firm grounds to do that. So there's the social justice neighborhoods, you know, the heat islands, the pollution places, but older people are clearly, there is good, strong evidence, more susceptible to heat effects and more susceptible to pollution effects from the burning of fossil fuels. So if you wanted to advocate as a position from self-interest, which is how most people advocate, there is a very strong health message you could take. So I just wanted to put that out there before we wrap up.
Yeah.
But part of our strength is that we're seen as not advocating from self-interest, but as an interest in the world.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I have to go, have to pick up my grandkids. Thank you so
Good
much.
for you. Ask them if they got any song ideas.
Okay.
No, I think,
Yeah.
advocating for access to free air conditioning for seniors could be a political message that could be of value.
Yeah, investing in air conditioners that are convection and take 1/100th the electricity and are built on principles that were figured out by the Mayans of high surface area of clay.
Right.
That's where
right.
the future is.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good. Yeah, sounds
It's-
great.
So one other quick thing that I'd like to throw out there, hopefully for a future talk, is how to talk about the future in a more positive way.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important, and I don't think we know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I have at least one granddaughter who literally despairs because she's really interested in climate issues and all of that, but she despairs and she's little. Why should a 12-year-old be despairing? You know, we
Yeah.
have to find a way. And I don't think we do that very well at this point, and I'd love to think about that some more.
I agree, Betty, and that's another thing that we could do collectively, right? So the people that I talk to and trust the most believe that we're going to get through this, that human ingenuity will help us get through it. The behavior change side is the hard side, but as economic incentives and behavior change align more and more, people feel that things will tilt. But I think that your group and others like it has a huge role to play. And so to me, the pandemic analogy is what I tell kids. It's like, yeah, there was a pandemic, or not kids, not little kids, maybe not 12-year-olds, but younger people that I encounter, college age and above, high school and above, is, you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Let's not fool ourselves. But we can get through it. There will be loss, there will be suffering, but we can minimize that by what we choose to do right now. And that's the message. That and the fact that the population curve, I think, is going to bend in the Earth's favor, even though the demographers and economists are wringing their hands. I really feel like they're wringing their hands for the wrong reasons. We can get through that too, because a lot of the jobs we were depending on, like, we're going to have technologies that do them, I think. I don't really know. I'm not a futurist, but we are very good at solving problems. This problem's hard for us, but we're very good at solving short-term problems. And when I see I go to Harvard Business School. I went to the Harvard Business School reunion. I'm not a Harvard business. I had to talk at it. The enthusiasm about climate tech, it's kind of disgusting because it's all about making money. But because they think they're going to make money, they're like into it. So
right.
it's interesting times. They're changing really quick. And in many ways that right now, as you know, there's some positive energy about, like, if the Republicans win, we are going to really get set back. I'm sorry if anybody's Republican, but we are really going to get set back in our climate goals internationally. So the biggest thing we can do in the short term is get out the vote and get out the vote in the swing states. That's the biggest thing we can do.
We're into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Got it.
I would love to talk more. I mean, maybe I should join,
we'll
except
figure
I
out
don't,
how to
I
do
don't,
it.
I don't live in
We'll work it out.
Massachusetts.
Please join. And maybe we can arrange a discussion like this again in the future. I will be in touch about this expert series.
Okay.
It won't be as free-ranging a discussion as we had today, which is unfortunate, I think, in a way, because I just really enjoyed that. But it will be, it will be folks who have a real interest in what you have to say, even though, there'll be more of them and you won't be able to interact as personally with everybody on the call, but if you're willing to do that, I'll be in touch and we can see.
Yeah, that's fine. You can kind of give me some guidance as to what
Okay.
you'd want the focus to be,
Okay.
but, all right. Well, thank you for your time.
Well,
I
thank you
really
so
enjoyed
much.
talking to
It's
all of
been
you.
Thank you.
Great.
just
Thanks.
Wonderful.
great discussion. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right. Bye.
So, oh, yeah, geez, she is dynamite.
Yeah. I know. It's been all over the place, right? Really. That's amazing.
So, George, you got back to me and thought next week that at this time, you and well, Roger, you haven't said anything yet.
I haven't, yeah, no, I think I mean, and I kind of pulled my piece together and focused it a bit more. And maybe George and I just need to kind of touch bases. We're on connected but somewhat independent paths, and I think we just maybe check in with each other and bring it to the next level. You think, George?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got a little set of ideas that are worth kind of focusing today as well. She definitely brought up a few thoughts. So
I love this
Yeah.
idea of thinking about what the strengths of our membership is. And I don't think we've ever kind of gone at talking to the membership about that kind of thing and how different people could maybe
Mm.
be more helpful. It seems to me that that's a really good idea.
Yeah, figure out how to
Lots of
package that,
stuff.
right?
Yeah.
No, I think so.
Yeah. The one area we didn't touch on too much, I think, is, the which, I continue to feel is the most challenging area, at least in this state, is buildings. And because I think the focus was, you can get rewarded by joining a movement, or doing something that brings you personal satisfaction. The whole business with buildings is getting a large segment of the population of the state to just, change the heating system in their house. And how do you create a reward system, that will, motivate people to make those millions of individual choices that are required to get us from where we are to where we need to be. And I don't think we really touched on that too much, that type of behavior change.
No, yeah, and I mean, the reality is, I think that if we put the system in place to make it easy to do the right thing, and people know when to do it at the right time, we realize people aren't going to swap out their system until it's kind of, maybe starting to fail. But we put together a program where we say, just come to us. We're going to give you this big incentive and we're going to arrange everything. We'll make it all happen for you. It's going to be easy. It's not a big behavior change. I think it is true if you try to get people thinking like, well, it's going to be a sacrifice. It's going to cost me extra money. I can't possibly afford it. It's cheaper to do this. And it's hard. It's too complicated. Yeah, we're not going to get anywhere. But that's what, Mass Save is supposed to be about, plus getting the word out and getting influencers out there and getting the heat pump coaches out there and all of that stuff. I'm more optimistic about.
Maybe. And I was thinking as she was talking too, just in my own community. I mean, and just for myself, I mean, it was 10 years ago that we converted one of our old elementary schools to a community center. And we converted it from oil heat at that time to natural gas. And I thought, oh, terrific. So
somewhat terrific.
But I didn't, and I find the same with at least with our select board, a lot of people. I mean, there has been a real shift, just, looking over the last 8 or 9 years about how people think about buildings. I mean,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, I mean, somehow it's starting in January, we're going to have 3 full-time people working in our sustainability office. That I don't even know
Oh.
exactly how this happened. Three full-time people, one of whom is going to be energy focused, and one of whom is Amy Meltzer's son, who's already there. So stuff is moving different speeds, different places. We had a heat pump pizza party. We had 100 people coming out. And
Wow.
generated no, well, that's 100 people, and it's generated a whole bunch of heat pump coaching requests that we're filling now. So I think part of it, people have to think about it, but they're not going to jump on board if they got a brand new gas system, and they're going to just say, for the sake of the climate, I'm going to do this. That's a behavior change that's a bridge too far. But getting people to do the right thing when it's going to, we just make it easy, and they know about it. I think it may move too slowly. To your point, Arnie, I'm not saying, it's ever going to move fast enough. I totally agree with you that there's barriers there, but it's moving. It's moving. It's
No,
not.
it is moving. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Okay.
so next week we'll have the
Yeah, we'll do that. And George, you and I can we set a time before we all sign off?
Sure.
Okay, so you guys, anybody else? George and I will set a time unless you have something else to say. Anybody? Bye, Betty.
And I will be in touch with Tina to.
Yeah.
I think she would be a terrific.
Yeah. Well, and I think she must have something in the can to start off with a book talk, that
she does have, she asked me in an email before today's meeting, should I have slides and stuff? And I said, no, we're thinking of this as kind of an informal discussion. So I think she does have
I would suspect whatever she presented at the Harvard Business School, probably.
Right.
At least to start things off, and then we can move, there'll be a discussion period. So yeah, sounds good.
All right.
George.
So do you guys want to continue, and I'll drop off. I'll make one of you the host.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make Roger the host.
Okay. Right. I'm in charge.
All right.